Now let us see, students, what are the unusual things that Franz noticed at school on that particular day. When he neared school and entered the premises, there was another surprise waiting for him. Now let me read out a portion which is very important from the book. Here it goes. Usually when school began, there was a great bustle which could be heard out in the street. The opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison, very loud, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. But now it was all so still. Now student, please mark this section, as there is something unusual about the entire atmosphere in the school, which is very important part of the chapter. Franz noticed many unusual things about the school that day. When Franz reached the school, he was surprised to notice a strange calmness and quietude. That morning, the atmosphere in the school was quite different from the usual normal days which we usually observe in a school classroom. Usually every morning when the school began, there would be a great commotion and activities. In normal regular days of school, there was a great hustle and bustle. The opening and closing of desks, lot of noise and chaos which you usually observe in a school classroom. Lessons repeated in unison. Unison means speaking together at the same time. Here it means student reading lessons all together, and the teacher M. Hammel's great ruler rapping on the table. All this creates great noise, usually seen in the morning when the school began. But on that particular day, it was unusually quiet and still. There was no chaos but silence. Here the author gives a nice comparison to make the readers understand about the school atmosphere that day. The stillness and quietness that morning was like a Sunday morning. Sunday morning were usually quiet, as there was no trouble, there was no such sound coming out of the school like in usual days, and it seemed that the school was closed as it is used to be on a Sunday morning. That kind of silence prevails in the school that particular day. This is the first odd thing that Franz observed that day at school, and he was puzzled and bewildered. Franz had planned that he would take cover under the commotion. Commotion means the noisy activities of the student, since he was late for school. He had hoped to be able to slip into classroom without being seen or noticed by M. Hamel, and he would get into his seat without being noticed, as there was always lot of noise at the beginning of the class every morning. But that didn't seem possible on that particular day, because everything was unusually quiet. Students, mark this line from the book. I had counted on means rely on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen, but of course that day everything had to be quiet as Sunday morning. I want you to underline this portion. Then moving on. Franz then peeped inside his class through the window and saw his classmates already seated in their place, and M. Hamel walking in the classroom with his iron ruler under his arm. The sight of the M. Hamel walking in the classroom and his friends already seated in their seats, all these things scared him because he was already late. He was scared and blushed. Blushed means become red-faced with fear and embarrassment. He was scared and blushed as he had to open the door and reach his seat in front of everybody. Franz was scared for having come late to school. He is scared because he would get scolding when he would be questioned on participles and he would not be able to answer for not having his lessons prepared. This shows the teacher might be very strict and a strict disciplinarian, someone very particular about discipline, about punctuality, and all other things. That is why Franz was too frightened to enter the class, because he knew M. Hamel would be harsh on him and scold him harshly. But what he thought didn't happen, surprisingly. Franz expects something but gets quite opposite in return. Now what is that? Let us see. Franz felt that the atmosphere in the school was strange and solemn, means very serious. When Franz entered the class and M. Hamel saw him, M. Hamel, instead of scolding him, spoke to him kindly, which was contrary to his expectation. Franz didn't expect that M. Hamel would be so kind to him. M. Hamel was patient with him that day. He was unexpectedly kind to Franz, and he just told Franz, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you." He gently allowed Franz to go to his seat as the class was about to begin without him. Despite Franz was late to school, he was welcomed by the teacher, and Franz was surprised that the teacher did not scold or rebuke him. This was an exception. This was the second odd thing, the second strange thing that Franz observed at school. The temperament of M. Hamel. Franz had expected the teacher to be very angry, very annoyed, but surprisingly, the teacher remained very calm, very compassionate, and very understanding, and gently asked Franz to go and take his place. Franz was surprised and confused. Franz hurried to his seat. After some time, he overcame his fear and became comfortable. He noticed that M. Hamel was dressed in his best attire. That was quite unusual, because only on special occasions like prize days, inspection days, he used to wear such special clothes. And what was he wearing? M. Hamel was wearing a beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and a little black silk cap, all embroidered. Franz observed that on this particular day, M. Hamel was completely different as an individual. He was not like the old strict teacher. He was calm and patient on that particular day. It was something different about the teacher in terms of his appearance on that particular day. However, what confused and surprised him most was the presence of the village elders in the classroom. This was a rarity. Rather, it had never happened before. The old people attending school in large number and filling the last benches, sitting all quiet and eager to learn, which was quite surprising. The last benches of the classroom that usually remained empty, but on that particular day, the last benches were occupied by the senior village man. Those people include old Hauser, who was one of the elder villagers who gathered with the children in M. Hamel's classroom that day. He was wearing his three-cornered hat. Then there was retired mayor, the former postmaster, and several others. Everyone seemed quiet and sober, means grave. They were all sad. It was like an atmosphere of gloom, and one could literally make it out from the expression on their face, on the faces of the village elders. The old Hauser brought his old primer. Old primer is an elementary reading textbook with him to the class, which was torn and damaged at the edges caused by frequent handling, and held it open on his knees, with his great spectacles lying across the pages. Thumbed at the edges means when you use something or handle something frequently, the edges become damaged, as you can see it in the picture. That is meant by the thumbed at the edges. There is something very different he noticed about the village elders. The kind of eagerness, the kind of zeal these old people were showing towards learning is quite surprising. So, what he observed in the school that day? That is silence, very sober mood prevailed, gloomy atmosphere, and the presence of this elderly man taken together. All these five relevant points, this would be essential for you to understand how the class on that particular day was different from the usual normal days of the school. It was a sharp departure from the conventional classes which M. Hamel took on other days. Something was amazed, something was different on that particular day. Now, at this part of the chapter, friends will understand and will come to know what is the reason behind this unusual situation at school and why there was an unusual scenario at the school that day. Let us read now. Please mark this part, children. This is the important part. Let's read. While I was wondering about it all, M. Hamel mounted his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson, and I want you to be very attentive." Now, this is a very surprising revelation made by M. Hamel. Franz was still wondering as he observed the changes around him when M. Hamel mounted on his chair and made a startling revelation. And what was the announcement? The teacher M. Hamel, in his grave and gentle tone, announced to the school. Now we will all understand what was the reason behind the unusual scene that Franz observed on that particular day. Franz was still wondering as he observed the changes around him when M. Hamel mounted on his chair and made a surprising revelation. What was the announcement? The teacher M. Hamel, in his grave and gentle tone, announced to the class that it was the last French lesson he would be giving, as orders had been sent from Berlin renouncing the teaching of France, means stop the teaching of French in the schools of Lorraine and Alsace, and in its place only German would be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine, and a new master was going to arrive the next day. This announcement from M. Hamel came as a complete shock, and everyone was stunned in the classroom, especially the students. These words of M. Hamel seemed to be a thunderclap. Thunderclap means something startling or unexpected. Thunderclap to Franz, since the announcement was unexpected and sudden for him. He was left in surprise and shock to learn that they would learn German instead of their mother tongue French. Now he remembered the gathering at the town hall, friends' confusion about why everyone in the classroom is behaving so politely and why the backbenches are full of men from the village bearing sad expressions, is answered by Hamel breaking the news. He said to himself, "Oh, the wretches!" That was what they put up at the town hall. This is the realization of Franz, and he uses the word wretches. The Germans were wretched people, means villain, ruffian. So you know through this expression, one thing is very clear. That is the deep-rooted hatred, the anger, the outrage which French people have or develop for the Germans. So this makes it clear as to what was put on the bulletin board on that particular day and why the villagers had come to school that day. French number went near to have a look and actually see what was written on or put up on the bulletin board. But now we all understand that this is the order that German had issued to stop teaching French in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine and is getting replaced by their own language, that is German. So this is officially the last lesson, the last class on French. You could imagine the kind of impact the words of M. Hamel must have had on all the students and the people present in the class. Now after that, we will talk about what was the impact on France and people and how did France and people get affected by the announcement of M. Hamel.